Welcome to Night Shadows. I'm Stewart Best, where the paranormal is normal, where that which you thought you knew, you didn't, and where the future can be known if you know exactly where to look.
Well, good evening, everyone, and tonight we're very honored to have David Bunn on, also Thomas Locke, known a.k.a. Thomas Locke, who's written I don't know how many books, I'll bet many of them are bestsellers, and we're just very honored to have him on. Hi, Davis. How are you doing tonight?
Really good, Stewart. Thanks for having me.
Well, no problem. And Larry, are you with us?
Yes, Stewart, I'm here, and so good to talk with you tonight, Davis. I've been a fan for years.
I appreciate it, Larry. It's been really good corresponding with you about this.
Well, where do we start? Should we start? How did you get into this, Davis? You have written so many books. What got you interested in all of this, in the writing part of it?
It came from a completely left field as far as the writing is concerned, Stewart. I was raised in North Carolina, had just a sense of never fitting in. Basically my entire life, I just never felt like the standard sort of, just everything about the basic life of the conservative southern town, it was like wearing somebody else's clothes. And so I graduated from university, and my dad and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, a couple of uncles, my cousin were all lawyers, and the expectation was that I was going to go in and join the law firm and basically, just wear the Armani and whatever. And I escaped. I went to England. I did a graduate degree in finance and moved to Switzerland and then moved to Africa and the Middle East. And then when I was 28, I was living in Germany working as a consultant. And, for a 28-year-old, I was doing well, and I was just absolutely miserable. And I just took a turning. I'd always been a big reader. I decided I had these stories that were just whirling around in my head, and I decided that I was going to give it a try. And literally within a week of starting, I knew there was nothing else I wanted to do with my life. So I started taking this very seriously. It was like I'd finally found a job that I felt like was worth giving my life to. And I had my day job, and I wrote for 9 years and finished 7 books before my first was accepted for publication. And during this time, I kept working as a consultant. So there were probably 1,000 times where I had every reason in the world to quit, and just out of sheer stubbornness and desperation, I kept plugging away. And I think part of what's been fueling this, for me, it's not that I have been pushing myself to write so many books. It's just what's been natural. And I think part of it is faced with the desperation of making it work when it felt like at many times the whole world was against my becoming a writer. When it did become possible, when I did start living from it, there was this sense of just being released from the chains. And I'm very comfortable. I do a minimum of 4 full-length books a year, and that is, for me, my natural pace. I'm not forcing it. I'm very comfortable with it, and have been. I've done a minimum of 4 books a year for 18 years.
Wow. A passion of the heart, we could say.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty much. And that's basically why there are 2 names, have been ever since I stopped. I used to do a book or 2 each year, co-authored with Jeanette Oak, who is Canada's biggest-selling living author. And she retired from ill health about 4 years ago, and I just, my first passion as a young reader was what you call the paranormal, speculative fiction, and I just thought, it's now or never. So I started writing these books. I didn't have a way of publishing. I didn't have anyone who was interested in receiving them. Even reading them was a trial. Getting someone to read them, and I just loved it. I have just had such a great time with these books. I just love it. And then 2.5 years after I finished the first of these, which was a traditional fantasy called Emissary, the head of sales for Revell, it's one of the imprints of Baker. Actually, he's now the head of sales for all of the Baker Publishing Group. He's a friend. His name's Dave Lewis. Dave Lewis came down to see me, and I told him I'd been doing this, and I just asked him if he'd give it a read, and he said yes, he'd read it, but Baker didn't do science fiction or fantasy, and I already knew that, but I didn't have anyone else to read it, and I just wanted to, somebody to tell me that he actually thought it was a pretty good book, and so he read it, and I didn't hear anything from him for a month, and it's that sense of he likes me too much to tell me that he thought it was junk. And it turns out that he went back up to Grand Rapids and talked to the chairman and talked to Jennifer Leap, who's now the publisher of all of the Baker Group, and they really liked it. They came back to me and said, look, okay, we're going to give you a 6-book contract for speculative fiction. We're going to do this as a trial balloon for the whole idea, and the only thing is you've got to take a pen name because it's just so different from what people expect from David Bunn, and that's how it started.
Wow. Well, that's it seems that happens to a lot of writers. They get rejected and rejected and rejected, and they find someone that'll read it. I'm sure that they had to argue, debate that in behind the scenes. It's sort of like Hollywood, I guess, in a way. You have some of these going into movies, or have you had some of them actually made into movies?
One has been made so far. It's called Unlimited, and I actually did the screenplay first and then did the book after. And that one was published by B&H Broadman and Holman about 2 years ago, and the film is scheduled to be released from Sony Provident in April. And then there's another, the first of these speculative fiction, the traditional fantasy called Emissary, has been acquired by Clarion. It's a UK film group, and they've done the script and they've hired a director, and that's, they're now in the process of raising the money. So that would be the next one, probably. I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, with these small groups, with the small production companies, the biggest trial of all is raising the money. And they've had a big deal that's happened recently. Clarion has, the largest distributor of films in England, has offered them a dollar-for-dollar production investment. So, in other words, for every dollar that they raise from other sources, this group will give them $1, and the ceiling for this is $15 million each, so a $30 million budget, which would make this one of the largest British films of the year. If it actually happens, it would just be it would be so cool.
Wow.
It's been a while getting it there, and if this actually does happen, it would be amazing. So I'm trying hard to just, take it easy, not get excited. It's really, working with Hollywood is a roller coaster. I have 4 different projects that are at, one stage or another right now in LA. And I mean, they're really cool, but at the same time, it's like, okay, where's the check?
Well, I suppose
boy.
once Hollywood gets a hold of it now, do you expect that you'll be able to recognize the movie when it gets made? As Hollywood has a way of taking a good book and kind of, how do we say, manipulating it to Hollywood specs?
Well, yeah, because I've done scripts now. I actually am a lot more comfortable with this, I think, than a lot of writers. And I think part of this is because I have worked on so many titles, and also because I've worked as a co-author with Jeanette. I did 13 books with her. I did 2 books with Larry Burkett, and if I was talking, or when I'm talking to writers at that sort of tier, like they have, had that first level of success, and they're dealing with this issue of how do I turn from being the occasional writer into having writing as my career. And one of the things that they often talk about is the issue of co-authoring. And there are certain sort of tenets that I feel like are really important in going into this process. And it's the same set of tenets that I urge authors to just really take down at the bone and sinew level if they're going to work with Hollywood. And one of these is that the whole issue of defensiveness towards the writing process has to be dropped. You're no longer the author. You are developing a product that is going to be shared with other egos. And if you go into this with the idea of this is my project, this is my script, this is, I am the one who's got these things that are just, cast in stone, then you need to stick with books and sole authored books. Because really the one of the key elements of success both with Hollywood and with co-authoring is flexibility. There needs to be that sense of seeking to understand the emotional perspective of the other person. And when you work with LA, these are 20 or 30 different voices. And basically what you're doing at that stage is when you either sell rights to a book or you are writing the screenplay, is you are serving as one component of a very, very large project. And the emotive perspective, the vision, the controlling voice in the film project is not the author. The author is the architect. But the architect hands over the project to the buyer, which is the producer. The producer is the person responsible for putting the whole project together, and the director, who is responsible for the day-to-day. And those two voices dominate the whole filmmaking project.
Fascinating. Well, I understand how that would work, because once the book is sold into Hollywood, then of course you would have to be a collaborator, I suppose, with many others to get this thing on the screen. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to talk about the book that's coming out here. What, September 2nd, 3rd, 4th, somewhere in there? This Domino?
The 4th, yeah.
Effect?
Domino Effect.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on that? Tell our listeners what that's about. And one of the reasons I want to bring it up is I know it's about economics, and people over here in the United States are very, very concerned with what's going on, not only globally, but what's really happening over here monetarily. The trends are downward. The trends are for a global collapse. and so this would be a fascinating read. So, could you elaborate what you want to on that book?
Sure. Last May, so 15 months ago, I had the opportunity to interview the head of the British version of the Securities and Exchange Commission. He's basically the top cop in Europe for finance fraud, bank fraud, and he works for the Bank of England. It's sort of like he's the guy who would, over here, he'd be answering to Janet Yellen, the head of the Federal Reserve System. And I had met him at a conference. We hit it off. He liked the idea of a writer who had a background in economics and finance, and I told him that I was interested in writing a story, but I didn't know what to write about. And he liked that too. You know, there was a sense of going into this with my eyes open and I'd actually, what we were both saying in the conference was that we were concerned about the exact things that you just mentioned. So we sat down and we had this very nice, you know, he's an accountant. He's a forensic accountant. It's sort of like a detective with numbers, which is not the most emotional, you know, touchy-feely kind of person you're going to meet, but it was a good conversation. So at the end of the hour, you know, I was getting ready to leave, and I said, "Can I ask you one last question?" He said, "Yeah, okay, go ahead." I'd already run over the time that he had said he could give me, and I said, "I have been reading The Economist, the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and over the last 6 weeks or so, I've grown increasingly concerned reading between the lines that some of the big international banks have started returning to the tactics that brought us to our knees in the 2008-2009 recession." And
yes.
It was the floodgates. He shut the door. He said, "Sit back down again." And we spent the rest of the afternoon talking about this. So when I walked out, I had all of this information. I had no idea how to write it. And I had a book that came out in November 2015, which was a national bestseller called The Patmos Deception. And it was a romantic mystery. It had nothing to do with finance. And I had last summer, so 13 months ago, in July of last year, I had a meeting at the annual booksellers conference with my publishers, and it was basically, you know, we sit down, we just, you know, go through the things that are going on, and is everything okay and all that. And I told them at the end of this, they'd already contracted me to write a sequel to this bestseller, and I told them about this meeting, and I said, "I've got all of this information. I have no idea what the story is, but here are my worries." And what you're looking for in a drama is the fault line, the potential point at which there's going to be a major sort of thing that's going to hit the nerve of the country, you know, more than a story, something that actually exists in the sort of shadow mind of the collective consciousness of a culture. That is really the basis for high drama. And so I told him this, and I was with the publisher, who is sort of like the CEO of the company, and the managing editor, the head guy for the books. And they both said, "You have to write this next." And it's the sort of thing that you, as an author, you like to hear because it means that the publishing house is behind you. But the problem was I didn't have a story. I had a problem, but I didn't have a story. And so the last day of the conference, I had 2 sleepless nights after this, and the last day of the conference, I had a breakfast meeting with my oldest friends in the book industry. They are the former publisher and editor, their husband and wife, now retired, of Bethany House. And I told them, I just said, "This is the problem." It started off the same thing. And then I said, I don't know how to write this as a story. You can't start with technical information. You have to make this something where the character is emotional. The character is someone that the reader cares about enough to, jump into this new and strange world of international finance and recessions and stuff like this. And without blinking an eye, the editor said, you have to write this as a Book of Esther story. And I was like I could physically see all the fragments come together. That it's in this particular case, Esther is a financial analyst, which is, again, as far as I know, it's never been done in a story. But and the reason is because they're the people that work in the background. It's not one of the high fashion jobs, but they are the ones that determine what investments a bank or a derivatives company or whatever is going to make. And in this particular case, the woman is leading a double life. On the one hand, she's the senior financial analyst for the largest investment bank outside of New York in the United States, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And on the other hand, she's terrified at night because she sees not just the bank, but the entire world financial system moving ever closer to the precipice. And she decides that despite all of the things that she's going to lose by going public, she has no choice. She has to protect her people. That was the story.
Wow. So you take real facts and put them into fiction in this particular method. What is your take, now jumping out of books for a moment, on what is really going on? It does not sound good. Everything I can find, the derivatives are out of control, basically. It appears that, the banks are just running up more and more of this unsolvable debt situation that the whole world is in. And I'm curious about what your take would be after investigating all this to write your novel on it.
Okay, there are three things, Stewart, that are really important here. The first is, and before I start, maybe I should just remind you, my background is I studied economics in North Carolina at Wake Forest and then went to London and did finance. And I have lived outside the United States since I was, I just turned 20, so since I was 19 years old. So there are three things that you need to understand. The first is the majority of the current analysis in terms of the people that you see on television talking about the business and so forth, look at it almost exclusively from the standpoint of the United States. And they do this not because they don't recognize the rest of the world, but the fact is that if you make it a global issue, probably 90% of the people that watch these shows would change the channel. The problem is that by being national in perspective, you are missing out on where the real risk lies, because the international finance is the dominant force now. Banks are no longer national companies. It's like Pepsi-Cola. It's not, it may be based in Atlanta, but it is a dominant global force. More than two-thirds of its revenue is generated outside the United States. And it's the same for the big banks. Borders don't matter anymore except at the time of paying taxes. In terms of their business, it is a question of where the profit is available. And when you have a situation today, like today, and this is point two, where there are very few companies, relatively speaking, that are making large enough profits to justify the level of the stock value.
Yes.
But their prices are being bid up in any case because there are so few standard investment opportunities because interest rates are basically at zero, then you have this ocean of cash on an international level that is just looking for a return. So the result is that, and this is the third thing, the investments that are being made, these derivative trades, the stock markets and the third world, the resource acquisitions, the futures trading, the size of the bets have exploded. And this is the weak point right now. Where we were talking at the time of the 2008-2009 recession, we were talking in terms of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now the trading size has increased by a factor of 10. So the Forex, the foreign exchange market, is now trading at 10 times the size of the 2008. It's gone from $2.5 trillion to $25 trillion a year. A day in size. And the reason why the size has grown so much is both because the cash is available and because the margins are so much smaller. The amount that they're making on each trade is down to pennies. There are a number of things that feed into this. One example is what's called the algo trades, the speed of the trading. But the risk is not from any one particular issue. The risk is from several things happening at once, and that's where the domino effect comes in. And so what Esther is trying to do is to say, we need to stop looking at the issues. It's like, okay, there's a recession in Japan, and it impacts the New York Stock Exchange, which is what happened last week. Yes. There's an announcement that there's a recession in Japan and the New York Stock Exchange goes down. There's no logical basis for this except fear. But what you need to understand, what Esther is trying to declare in the story, is that the problem of today doesn't matter. What matters is that this ocean of money on an international scale is not being controlled. And so the potential for walking off the cliff is very great. And so what she wants, what she's trying to do is to say, before the crisis happens, we need to take 5 steps. And those 5 steps become the basis of the story. She builds up this groundswell of support, and she's effectively racing the clock, trying to get these in place before the big one hits. And, yeah, that's it.
Well, Larry, you got any questions? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to, I've been a David Bunn fan for years, and I've come to also enjoy Thomas Locke, but Davis, one of the books that really just grabbed me and drug me inside it. I mean, I'm an avid reader, but, I read a lot of books, and I read them quickly, but the book you wrote, Lion of Babylon, grabbed me by my ears and drug me inside the book. I couldn't leave it alone. I had to go all the way through it, and then I read it again and again. But, and I followed, that character through the other 2 books, Rare Earth and Strait of Hormuz. But I'll tell you what, under Thomas Locke, when you wrote the Fault Line series, you begin with the Trial Run, which I really enjoyed, and now Flashpoint has came out. Wow, I'm intrigued by Stewart. As the show opened up, said the paranormal. We look into the paranormal. Listen, this is incredible, and I noted on one of your ads you said we may have to redefine death, and I'm so intrigued. I can't hardly wait for the 3rd book in that series. I've studied a number of things. I've read, Ed Dames and the military and the Black Project, spy things, and looked into this. But you hit a home run with the fault lines. I mean, it's incredible.
Well, thank you. Let's go back to the Lion of Babylon. That was a big important book in terms of my development. I had a really remarkable experience that got me started on that. Sort of like what happened with this finance thing. I had a chance encounter. I was working on a film project in London, and I met completely by chance an Iraqi who was the son of the second most powerful imam in Iraq. And he was over studying the history of Arabic film at the University of London. And we just had this, remarkable connection. And it was all based on story, so there's this devout Muslim and there's me, this Christian, and we are having this communication on something where there's this impossible bridge that's being built. And he was complaining about how so few Arabic films had any sort of opening in the Western world, and he was saying, it's you hear, if you work in the Middle East, which I have, you hear this all the time, everything is a conspiracy. And I told him point blank, I said, I'm sorry, the reason why so few Arabic films get an opening with the Western public is because there's so few Arabic films that any Western person has any interest in ever giving 5 minutes to. which is probably not the most diplomatic thing I've ever said. But we started talking about the construct of story and what archetypes are. And he'd never heard of the concept of archetypes, which is a Western concept based on the original archetype concept comes from Greek philosophy and was developed in a sort of a universal way by Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst. But basically what the archetype says is that there are components of story that transcend culture, time, and race, that are embedded at the genetic level inside the human psyche. And it's one reason why postmodern story, while it has this huge following in certain elements of society, doesn't work in terms of the mass, the big picture. It's just almost impossible for someone who's an avid reader of commercial fiction to even name the Pulitzer Prize winners of the last 10 years and the National Book Award winners, because they go to literary fiction, which is dominated by postmodernism now. And postmodernism hates, it loathes, it considers itself the antithesis of archetypes. And so I told him the only way that we would ever be able to have a conversation about story is if I used an example and showed him how to build a story. And I'd had this desire to do a story based in Baghdad, in the middle of the wind down of the American involvement and the withdrawal of the troops and the vacuum this created. But I couldn't do it unless I had at least one principal character who was an Iraqi. And I don't speak Arabic, and I've never been to Baghdad. And so I didn't know how to do it. And he said, okay. So I told him what I wanted to do in this case to make it a livable story for Western culture was I wanted to have the Iraqi be a minority, an Iraqi Christian. And again, he said, okay. So
wow.
We spent 6 weeks together, and we would do a scene, and I would explain to him why the scene needed to be this way. And I ended up being part of his doctoral thesis, and he in turn gave me this amazing insight into what it meant to live through the reign of Saddam Hussein as an Iraqi, as a Baghdadi, and it was phenomenal, and it won the Best Book Award of the year from Library Journal. So there are others, Larry, who agreed with your assessment. Yeah. So, and as far as Trial Run is concerned, we just learned Trial Run was released in August of last year, and we just learned that it was awarded the Best Book of the Year by Suspense Magazine, which is kind of neat, you know, because we're not actually, it is a thriller, but it is a science fiction thriller. And that hasn't happened since Michael Crichton. So that was really cool. That was really cool. That really was. Yeah.
And I did notice also, Davis, that in the Flashpoint, you know, you're talking about the domino effect, and I noted that you moved somewhat into a economic, financial power situation with your characters, and that was kind of interesting, leading up, I guess, to the domino effect.
No, it was just I needed something. You know, if you're going to write a thriller, one of the things what you have to do is you've got to find something that is getting technical here, but one of the things that needs to happen for a good thriller to work is that there needs to be an early crisis problem that has nothing directly to do with the real issue of the book, but which leads logically into this. And so what I was looking for was something where there would be this thing of like, okay, there's this person, well, that's basically what I started with. There's this person, her name is Lena, and she has to be doing something where her world is completely turned around because of a voice that she recognizes as her own voice that is sending her messages in her brain. And she doesn't know if she's going nuts or not, but everything she's hearing is both taking this enormous risk and at the same time makes perfect sense. And so that's what I had. And then I was thinking, what on earth am I going to do to make this happen? And okay, it was like, all right, she's a flunky working for Wall Street, which is her dream ever since she went into college, and she's landed this job, and she is being effectively turned into a slave by the typical Wall Street mid-level executive, where the attrition rate, the firing rate at the level that Lena comes in, the entry level, is 90%. 10% of those that are hired stay on. So she's come up with this idea to make a huge amount of money for her investment group, and she's turned down flat. The mergers and acquisitions boss says that she is insane to even do it, even suggest it, and threatens to fire her for writing it up as a report. So then I had to find something that worked, you know. I had to find something where there was that you could see and justify the idea that the bank goes, no way are we going to get involved in this. And at the same time, that it actually makes financial sense, and there was the possibility of having this, you know, huge upside. She gets $1 million from her father's retirement group. You know, there's an investment group that her father's a professor at the University of Florida, and the professors from the 5 Central Florida universities have a sort of an investment team mentality where they are pooling their retirement funds and going in and making the stock picks themselves. And so Lena goes in and she borrows $1 million, and she makes them, I can't remember now what it was exactly. I think she makes them $11 million in 9 days. And it's all because of this voice in her head that says, do this now. So I was desperate. I thought, gosh, this is a great idea, but what is going to be the possible investment? And when I found that it was, oh, gosh, I can breathe easy. You know, this actually works. So that was how that happened.
Well, how did you actually get onto the Fault Line series involving the technical side or the sci-fi side, as you would say, of individuals being able to leave their consciousness or their body with their consciousness to go into another, what you would call a dimension or
state,
parallel location?
Well, it's actually happening, Larry. A little background. I did 2 degrees as an undergraduate, one economics because I wanted to make money, and the second was in psychology because I just thought it was a fascinating subject. And I have always held an interest in this. It's just something, it's not a hobby, but it's just something that I think has helped a lot in building characters now, personality structure. I've done a couple of novels where the principal character is what's called a clinician, someone who is treating mental illness. And one of the things that is just, for a lot of the stories that I'm writing nowadays, I'll do research for several years before I find something, some hook, you know. So what I'm always looking for when I'm reading nonfiction is the hook for a possible future story. And the last 5 years, there's been more progress made in the study of brain activity than in the rest of human history combined. A lot of this has to do with a new generation of MRI, magnetic resonance imaging machines, and there are a number of other things that are happening, but one of the things that they have discovered is that by initiating small pulses of electromagnetic waves that resonate with the normal sort of wave patterns of a healthy brain, they can influence it's not that they can influence the thoughts, but they can influence certain actions, activities within the brain and certain areas of the brain. So there have been, literally just in the last 3 years, there have been major steps in what is called non-invasive therapies, where you're doing changes to fundamental problems with the human brain without having surgery. There are treatments now that are being used, non-invasive treatments for migraines, for what are called non-specific pains, non-treatable pains, for epilepsy, for other brain-based problems. Epilepsy is the one that's gotten the most attention, convulsive spasms and so forth. But one of the things that they have discovered as they have done this is that there's this pattern with maybe, like 7%. It's not a huge percentage, but it is, if you've got 30,000 trial subjects and you have 7%, it means that 2,100 people have been reporting the exact same experience. And these experiences are that they are effectively, when they're having these states, they discover themselves rising up. As far as their awareness is concerned, they're rising up out of their bodies. Actually, it's become a big enough deal now that they have a name for this. It's called voluntary out-of-body experiences, or OBEs. So what I did was it's like what Michael Crichton did with Jurassic Park. There is no way that you can take amber from the Mesozoic era and extract DNA and mix it with a frog egg and grow a dinosaur. It's not going to happen. But it's a great idea. So what I did was I said, okay, these OBEs are happening. So what if it was something that we could actually control, and that you have two groups? One of them is a group of scientists who made this discovery, and their aim is to see how far they can expand human consciousness by moving awareness beyond the boundaries of the physical realm. And then there's a second group, and this is run by the government intelligence agencies, and they have one aim and one aim only, and that is to steal the world's secrets.
Sort of remote viewing?
Yeah, exactly. It's remote viewing. That's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ingo Swann, I think, was the father that started remote viewing. I'm sure you're familiar with Major Ed Dames. They call him Dr. Doom. He's got a remote viewing team, and they remote view here and there. And he's the one who is forecasting what he calls a kill shot, a series of CMEs from the sun that is instigated by some sort of a object like a moon that comes very close to the Earth and then careens into the sun and causes a whole series of very powerful CMEs, which kill, he says, millions. And they've remote viewed that, I guess, now for years, haven't they, Larry? How long has he had that on? I mean, he's very dead serious about it. I mean, he says this is going to happen. So who knows?
Well, I mean, it may. There's, if you are talking about the scientists who have studied this, there are a number of voices that are coming up now, particularly because there are tie-ins with the movement of quantum mechanics outside of the lab and into reality. There are a number of studies with specific issues, particularly in quantum biology, where they're no longer tying quantum mechanics to controlled lab environments and looking at it as a component of, real life. Mm-hmm. If you talk to these people about remote viewing, and there's several really good studies about this, there are issues. I'll just give you a couple of things. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying you need to be aware that there are other voices about this. One of the suppositions is the same as with the near-death experience, where when the biological opponents to the concept of people dying and being able to see heaven and so forth is that there is an electronic reaction to a dying brain that creates the same hallucination. Right. And this can be conceivably happening also with remote viewing. We don't know enough about what's happening inside the brain. Those people, those scientists who do think that the remote viewing is real, question the issue of time, because when you latch onto something as your focal point, it is hard to tell what position in terms of time, because in the quantum world, time is not linear. It's easier to see it from the standpoint of a very placid lake, and you are aiming for this. It's like you are going for a particular position, but you have right now we don't know any way of setting a GPS, a compass position for where we are in time, and that is the question.
Well, that's one thing that they do say. They say the time is, they can see an event, but they don't know when it's going to happen. No,
and they don't know whether it's already happened. I mean, it could be.
Exactly.
It could be what they're seeing is one of those events that that shaped mankind's early days. That's just, that's just where we are right now, assuming that this is real. And I'm not sure that it is, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, it may be like you were saying, or it may not be. Nobody really knows. We only get these reports. It's kind of like, have you heard of the bots? What they call the bots at all? It's run by Cliff High, and what he has done, and I don't know what a logarithm they're using or anything else. They go out on the web and they note language changes, which they claim are in the universal consciousness, and that the universal consciousness has, shall we say, a slight handle on the future. And so by these changes, they will predict certain things are going to occur. And Larry, do you know what their success rate is? It's pretty good, not time-wise. They have no clue on the time, once again, but they seem to be able to predict certain trends that are coming, and lo and behold, most of them do. It's very, very fascinating.
And these trends are called bots?
Well, yeah, the bots, what they call is the collection of the language. And they run this through some sort of computer programs, and it tells them these language changes predict certain things that are going to occur. If you wanted to write a novel about the bots, that would be a very fascinating thing to do. His name is Cliff High.
It sounds wonderful. It sounds wonderful. I am the one who's been rewarded by this conversation. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, the bot. Yeah, it's very interesting.
You can find him at www.halfpasthuman.com, and he has these reports he issues. They're fascinating, and he never claims that the time is correct or whatnot, but they have had many major hits. It's kind of like Bible codes. They're kind of a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay, great, thank you. I've made a note of that.
Coalescing field theory. I'm reading from a group of scientists recently begun work on the term coalescing field theory. Human beings at their most elementary level are pulsating energy charge. This is part of that quantum, is it not? Quantum physics that they're into?
There are a group of scientists and non-scientists. It's one of the areas where the physicists who disagree with this, you even talk about this, they start foaming at the mouth. And I have a nephew who I really care about, who is I can't get in the same room with him if I'm going to talk about these things. But the coalescing field theory is one of these areas where, for me, I feel like we have a cycle that we are about ready to enter into, where the Renaissance period had one of its major components, one of the seeds that generated this amazing period of human awareness, growth in science, growth in the living standards. The end of effectively the Dark Ages was where there was this schism between science and the church, and the medieval dominance of life by fear, basically, was replaced by a quest for knowledge. And I feel like that there are two conflicting trends that are happening right now. On the one hand, there is the self-destructive nihilism in story. It's represented by the postmodern story concept, where there is no hope, there is no hero, there is no answer. Every direction is equally valid. And on the other hand, there's what we're seeing with this movement for the first time in 6 centuries where scientists who are pure scientists and scientists who have a strong faith component to their lives are finding themselves communicating on the level of math about spirit. And I think that's absolutely incredible. I don't know how I'm going to write a story about that, but I just think that's amazing. And coalescing field theory is one part of this.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a fellow by the name of Dr. Paul LaViolette, and he wrote a book called Earth Under Fire, where he goes into quantum kinetics, he goes into the ancient literatures, and that the ancients were trying to warn us of things that were coming, and it's a fascinating read. He gets into this quantum physics quite a bit. He calls it subquantum kinetics, an underlying flux that, is more ethereal and spiritual than it is physical. So you're right. This is all coming together, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I think it is.
This thing for the mind. They're zeroing in on the mind. So, any other comments on Larry that you would like on some of the books?
Oh wow! How many books have you actually? Do you have a count? When I go to Amazon, Davis, I write in David Bunn or Thomas Locke, and oh my Lord, it is such a list. And so many I haven't read, but a lot of the last few years, I grab them quick as you put them out. I mean, they're really, really incredible reads.
Well, it's really nice of you, Larry. Thank you for saying that.
How many books have you got in your mind? Let's say the life expectancy of planet Earth continues for another 1,000 years. How do you do this? Do you write down ideas as they come along, or do you just keep them stored in your obviously very active mind?
Normally, it depends if we're talking about a Thomas Locke book or a Davis Bunn book. I've been doing the Davis Bunn books now I've been a published author for 24 years. And I know my audience. I love them. They love me. It's just, it's a really nice feeling. And there is a certain level of confidence, even when I go off in a new direction, like with Domino. There's a feeling of writing from the heart is very easy. It's not easy. It's profound and it's smooth. It's this sense of just it's natural. It's like a hard race, but at the same time, it's something that I've done often enough that it is just part of who I am. The Thomas Locke books are very different. I don't know how good they are in many cases. I get fired up on these ideas, and I find the best thing to do is to go ahead and take a few days away from my current project and put down as much as I need to on paper until that sense of the fire has diminished, and then set it aside. And I have 4 Thomas Locke books that I have written 50 pages or more of for each of them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether I'll finish them or when, but I did go back over 2 of them this week, and just really, I feel like I'm growing. I think that's one of the nicest things that's come out of this Thomas Locke experience, is this sense of the creative fire has remained undiminished. In many cases, I feel like it's stronger now than it's ever been. But with the Thomas Locke projects, there's been this opportunity to just break down the boundaries. I am moving in new directions, and I think becoming a far better artist as a result.
So you will explore in this any number of fields, then, I would assume.
Yes.
Because there's no limit to the technology, I guess.
What I'm thinking is that the area that I'm most drawn to with the Thomas Locke stories are the contemporary setting. In other words, where there's that opportunity to take a normal situation, life and people that we can identify with, and tweak it, change it, either through fantasy or through science fiction, so that we are seeing it through a completely different lens. That has been my greatest interest so far.
Well, I'm sure some of our listeners would love to write a book. Do you have any advice for them on what they should do or not do? Or
yeah, there are a couple of things that I could suggest, Stewart, and I would say in terms of if we're talking about people that have an urge, have a fire, and are just getting started, then I think the most important thing that they could see themselves doing is, well, three things. First of all, stop talking about it. The only energy that should be utilized here, the only outlet for this fire should be the page. And because it's so difficult, because there is this just huge barrier between the creator and the empty page, too often the fire is released through either verbally talking the story, telling it to people, or through rereading the pages that you've already done. And there needs to be this sense of accepting that the challenge, the discipline, the actual fact of being a writer is determined by doing this every day, writing a scene, whatever, and finishing the story, experiencing what it means to write the climax, and then start the redrafting process. When I first started writing, my first mentor was Arthur C. Clarke, the author of 2001: A Space Odyssey and a number of other big books. And he told me when we first met he would be willing to work with me, but only on the basis that I gave him my words that I would read a minimum of one book a week in my chosen genre, preferably by a living author, in other words, a current bestseller, so that I understood the market. And secondly, that I would do at least one page of first drafting every day, 7 days a week. The second thing I would suggest that every author needs to do is to go to a major writing conference, because there's so many things about the commercial process that can't be understood until you have experienced the world, the commercial world of the writer. And these major conferences will always have senior editors and agents there as speakers, and also meeting one-on-one with these people. And being able to see the creative world through their eyes is really important. And it also helps because you wind up having a vocabulary. You understand what it is that they're talking about, what it means to pitch, how to structure an overview, and so forth. These are crucial lessons. Mm-hmm. The third thing is, for myself, I feel like that one of the issues that needs to be faced early on is accepting that you are a writer, that this is not a hobby, this is not something that you're just, playing at now and then. If you're going to do this, you need to look at it from the standpoint of making the decision and developing the discipline.
Mm-hmm. Excellent advice. So you got started long, long ago, and it appears that, like you were saying, the fire is still there. So this is really a passion of the heart that I think most people probably are afraid. I've come to the conclusion that most people even fail at what it is they want to do because they're just afraid to start for some reason.
Yeah. Afraid to start, afraid to fail. I was actually interviewed by a Canadian group last week, and they asked what was the biggest thing that I had to overcome in my early days, and I ended up, I had debated this and decided that it was the fear issue, that learning that it's only through the daily discipline that you deal with the fear. And Stewart, that's going to close it off for me. I've got to get going now. I start my
well,
day.
Well, we appreciate and are very honored that you would come on. Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Well,
it really is.
I really appreciate it. Well, thank you for coming.
It's been fascinating. Thank you.
You are so welcome, Larry. It's great to have this chance to connect like this. And Stewart, it's very nice to meet you.
Okay. Well, nice meeting you, and take care of yourself.
You too.
We hope to have you back on. Okay.
Thank you.
Night.
Likewise. Bye, Larry.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Okay. Boy, that was fascinating. It makes you wonder how, a genius mind like that, obviously that's what we're dealing with, comes up with all of these ideas and concepts and turns them into, multitudes of books and titles. That to me is very, very fascinating, how that works.
Incredible, and a lot of his books, he writes a lot of, he has a lot of historical backing on a lot of his books, especially in the Christian fields, and he does incredible research. That's one of the things that have drew me to the David Bunn and the Thomas Locke, novels is the historical background. Even though they're fiction, they've got all embedded all through them these facts that are so. And really, as he said, he makes notes and goes from those notes. And I'll tell you what, there's very few people can write characters into the novels like he does. He invests a lot in his characters. And when you're through with one of David Bunn's book or Thomas Locke book, you feel like you know those folks.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's the key, that people can actually and literally identify with the characters. It's like going to a movie. Almost everyone can identify with one character or another, and so they follow that character throughout the whole movie, and almost the character becomes them, and they're living through that character in the movie. And you have to do the same thing with a book, as far as I can see.
It's absolutely incredible, and as you said, I could tell as he was talking, he already has plans for other things, and he's already got some ideas that are beginning to grow. So, and that will be an interesting novel coming out. I think he said just a few days now, September 3rd or 4th or 5th, the Domino Effect. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, particularly with the financial affairs that are going on all around the world, we have, I guess one would have to say it's a systemic virus that has been inoculated into the world financial system. Totally out of control, and I guess, it's up to the Lord as to when he decides to squash it. But it looks like we are getting fairly close. You want to talk about what is going on over there in the Middle East, switching horses? This thing seems to be heating up. I got a headline: Turkey launches major U.S.-backed ground and air incursion inside Syria, and now they're all fighting each other, it appears. What's happening?
Well, it's an incredible... It's almost like a quagmire, and everybody's becoming entangled in this quagmire. And what's so interesting, it seems like Erdogan is behind some of this. You've got, you've also got the Obama plan that's still in flux. However, there were some writings recently coming out of some postings in Europe and also Russia, reporting that this is a huge mistake as far as the U.S. and Turkey making this movement into northern Syria, because one of the things that has occurred, and you don't know if it was Obama or if you don't know it was Erdogan or both. That now they, and of course this is what's interesting, Stewart. None of our media, none of mainstream media, including Fox, is talking about this Turkish incursion into northern Syria. The tanks that are Turkey is now sending more tanks. They've run into resistance by the Kurds, who are not retreating, as they're reporting on the news. Matter of fact, Israel is reporting that the Kurds are now fighting the Turkish incursion themselves, and and of course Assad says this is an act of war. I think the wild card is waiting on a response from Putin. There's been no response from Russia, none, and that is very, very unusual. And there are some rumors in the background that seem to indicate that Russia is preparing a response. And you've got that on one hand, and then on the other hand, Stewart, you've also got in the background some talk and some movement of some type of Putin peace process talks that are going to begin to work through the Middle East. And so, you're sitting back, and we do know of the previous reports of some agreements possibly with, between Russia and Assad and the Turks and Iran, and some divisions of areas of, in the Middle East there. So this is a quagmire, and the Russian reports seem to indicate that this is a quagmire that is going to entangle the U.S. Without escape, because it's also alienating the allies of the other allies of the U.S. and the Arabs are now aggravated over this situation that Obama has agreed to let Erdogan move into. And this is what's interesting. There was a headline, and I shared with you just before the show started. I said there's a really incredible headline in the Middle East. It says, Biden in Turkey, Turkey in Syria.
Yeah. This is from the McTernan report, I think. Let me think. John McTernan. He says, I'll just read a little bit of it. He said, Turkey just invaded Syria with almost no government or news source reporting on it. This is incredible because of the longest time Erdogan has wanted to take over Syria as part of the reconstruction of the Ottoman Empire. Turkey is Sunni, while Syria, Iran are Shiites. This could lead to an all-out Sunni-Shiite civil war that has to come. Russia backs the Shiites, while the U.S. backs Turkey. Complicated, convoluted, and getting more complex by the day. So, what do you think Putin's reaction is going to be? Now, he did say that we are being led irreversibly into World War III. So is this not, when we're fighting over there, are we not really fighting Iran and Russia, in a way, in kind of a proxy war, so to speak?
Well, Stewart, I think that this actually began as a proxy war. In other words, the U.S. basically, as Obama began to, this really started way back with the Muslim Brotherhood movement, and Obama backed that and disposing the so-called kings. I refer back to Daniel when I say that, how that, a number of kings has been deposed by this leader of the U.S. or the so-called Western powers, with the stumbling block apparently being Assad. Now, that stopped. The deposing stopped right there. Russia began, and Putin especially, began to back Assad, and that's blocked what began with that Muslim Spring or the Muslim Brotherhood movement and Obama's big move in the Middle East in that direction. And, of course, there was a block in Egypt, you know, as El-Sisi stood up and got rid of Morsi, who was an Obama plant there, and, of course, you know, part of the radical Islam group and the Muslim Brotherhood. And so, you know, Russia moved in and blocked that so-called football game, I guess, or chess game, either way you want to put it, that Obama was working in there with his people. And now you begin to wonder which way can this go, because it did really start, Stewart, as a proxy war. But now it seems the U.S. is being pulled to the forefront again, and Russia's not going to submit, you know, to any of this. And so it may go from a proxy war to a real war, a World War III.
To a real hot
maybe.
one.
Yeah, it could.
Says Syrian Kurds rebuff retreat demand as Turkey threatens to intervene. If you want to know what is happening with Turkey invading Syria, this article explains that Turkey does not care about ISIS, but rather the Kurds. ISIS is not a real threat to Turkey, but the Kurds are. The situation in Syria is so complicated that it makes my head swim. Syria is a trigger for World War III, and everyone needs to be watching it very closely. And, you know, if you go into Albert Pike and his 3 world wars, this was to start, actually. What I'm seeing is a consolidation of the Islamic world encircling Israel, and this is actually a spiritual war between Islam, Christianity, and the Jewish race, or the Jewish belief systems. So this is what Albert Pike said was going to happen. This is what he said they were going to start, with the sole purpose of destroying, actually, Islam, destroying Old Testament Judaism, destroying Christianity, and bringing about the new religion of Lucifer. So is that what we're watching here?
Well, it seems to be playing out to some degree. You know, the interesting thing is, of course, Erdogan is, you know, he wants to establish his own caliphate, and and has really the sizable military to be able to do that, even greater than ISIS. And the Kurds now, this is the interesting part, and they are a thorn in his side, because they are really giving him a fit. You know, the Kurds are pretty much some of the old, I guess you could say, 10 tribes. Some of them moved into that region, and they've always been exceptional about accepting and protecting. Now, I'm talking about the Kurdish forces, accepting and protecting, whether they're Jewish or whether they're, you know, I guess you could say Christian to some degree. And, you know, all of these groups of you know, ancient church, I guess you could say, they're intermingled throughout that area. The Kurds have always gave them haven and protected them. And so really you're dealing in a way, even though it's a natural warfare that's going on, you're really reaching back even into ancient structures of religions that are entangled here too. It's a mess. I mean, a serious mess. And Israel seems to find herself right there on the border of the whole mess. I mean, Israel's right there, and they're surrounded by all this.
Well, we got reports today or yesterday that the Russian army units were put on high alert.
I heard that.
So why would they be put on high alert? Here's what it says. Troops in the Southern Military District, some units of the Western and Central Military Districts, as well as the Northern Fleet, the Air Force, airborne troops are put on full alert starting from 7 a.m. local time. The exercise will last through August 31st. And then we had another, let's see if I can find it, from that near-to-will Torture Fall article. And she said more or less the same thing, though, if I recall right, that there's something going on. Do you suppose they're getting ready for a major invasion? And this was about the, now, of course, you got to take everything with a grain of salt, but this was about Russian ministers, their ruling elite, being taken and put into underground shelters. Now, why would they do that?
Well, I'm sure in the back of their minds, Stewart, and Putin seems to keep all this stuff collectively in his head, and does warn us. I mean, he has warned the world, actually, but they don't listen. But, it's, like Ed Dames revealed that time, we did have a plan to actually do a surprise attack on Russia and take them out nuclearly. That plan was there. It was available. It was studied and approved, and they were even in the planning stages of launching that attack a number of years ago. And you remember how that some of the MIRVs and the missiles were messed up, and we had visitors, of course. I guess you could say maybe other than human that were involved in this and blocked some of our activities. But Russia's they're not deaf and blind. I mean, they have intelligence too. And a matter of fact, they've been actually gleaning our intelligence for a number of years. And the last 8 years of Obama, they've really got a lot of it. But and Hillary, of course. But the interesting thing is from what I'm gleaning from over in the Middle East right now, especially, the news indicates that Putin has two hot spots that he's guarding really closely that could lead to war at any time if certain things occur. And number one, that's over in Syria, of course. And then the other now that we haven't talked a lot about is the Ukraine and the Crimea region. And there appears to be a really big buildup of Russian forces, there around the Ukraine and the Baltic states. And, of course, this coincides with, and you're aware of the recent reports that we have moved, anti-missile systems into the Baltic.
Right up to the border.
And we put them in Putin's backyard, basically. And NATO has been rattling their swords. And I don't know if you've noticed it lately. Over the last week or two, the Ukraine has had some major saber rattling with their military there in the Ukraine, Kyiv, and also moving military throughout their country and going to a war alert. You wonder, why is Poroshenko all of a sudden rattling that Ukrainian military saber? Is he really wanting to goat Russia into attacking Ukraine? Ukraine's not NATO.
Yes,
but, the Baltic states are, but all of this is in flux, Stewart. It's like, and at the same time, we're having naval confrontations basically in the Baltic Sea. We're having it in the Mediterranean Sea, U.S. and Russian and
Iran,
NATO. All it's going to take is one mistake, either in the Baltics or the Middle East, and you're going to have a lot of stuff go down.
Well, I did read an article where shots were fired at the Iranian, they got these boats that carry these missiles, and they've got thousands of them, I'm sure. But one of our, destroyers fired some shots across the bow. But, if they're getting that close and they're harassing us, it's not going to take much to get that triggered. I want to read from what Torture Fall has to say, because you don't know if it's true or not, but if it is, it's one more clue, possibly, and that's what we're really dealing with, are clues, because nothing is being reported over here. A dire series of urgent action bulletins issued by the Ministry of Defense over the past 24 hours since Federation military forces went on full combat alert show preparations are being made for all-out global conflict, with top military officials being relocated to the Federal Protected Zone. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. One bulletin gravely warning that Hillary Clinton's and Obama's war may not be able to be stopped. Now, do you remember Obama making a comment that he did not think that he could necessarily stop a world war?
Yeah.
I think he made that maybe 8 months, a year ago. And I wondered at the time when he said it, what in the world is he talking about? Is he talking about the handlers have already decided, the rich men of the earth have already decided that World War III is now the only option, and that's what we're going to see?
Well, I remember that, but I also remember, Stewart, when he took office, you remember he said that we would, the U.S. would accept a nuclear strike without him retaliating. Remember that? That has not been negated.
Yes, that's right. They were not going to. They were going to absorb the first strike. Well, the Book of Revelation more or less says that's exactly what we do. We absorb it and we don't fight back. Well, I mean, if we were annihilated to the point that Revelation more or less says, there wouldn't be anything to fight back with. So it makes me wonder, simply because of the timing of all this, is there something going on that we have no knowledge of, and they really are getting ready to do something? And
well,
of course, once that match... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention, Stewart, I find it interesting that Putin, on more than one occasion, has came out to the media and announced we're heading towards a world war, and that the media will not even open the dialogue with the peoples of the world. And I don't think he's actually saying that without having a reason. I think there is a reason, and I guess you noticed too. Of course, our media didn't cover it, but there appeared to be an assassination attempt against Merkel the other day in the Prague.
I saw that. That makes me wonder too, because Germany is part of the coalition that comes against Israel. And I was reading an article where Germany is trying to open up relations with, I believe it was Turkey, and that would make prophetic sense that Libya, Germany, and all those, of course they hate Israel anyway. So I suppose once this thing starts, let's get Israel and drive her out to the sea, Psalm 83. The mindset of Psalm 83 is let's go get them.
I really do think, Stewart, what we're watching also with the Brexit and some of what's behind that is that the English people see somewhat where this may be going, whether it's a confrontation with Putin or an attack, in the Middle East on Israel or etc. I think they are trying to bow out of where this is all going, but they know, and the Brexit has been their way to try to bow out. And even though they're still in NATO, though, there's some reservations about the usage of a lot of military out of the UK. Things are changing. I mean, we're seeing some changes.
Yeah. I don't know how you even can keep track of all the changes. They're coming so fast now. And what's going on in the United States, I was reading some articles about how, their FEMA camps are more or less all set, ready to go. Walmart has closed, 235 stores, and I would venture to guess that the closure is for collection points, that they are going to, either through financial collapse or false flag or something of that nature, probably bring in some form of martial law. I'm not sure they would actually call it martial law, because they know what that would do to the people. But there's no question that they are getting ready for something dire to occur right here in the United States. So,
it's so interesting that you said that. And you remember our talk we had with Randy Yarborough, that he brought up so much of interesting history about this state of emergency, and then every new president that actually takes office has to declare that state of emergency to keep it alive and keep it in effect. I don't guess you would need a martial law. You could just continue that state of emergency and maybe write some more executive orders to back that up. That's interesting, Stewart, how that the state of emergency, it continues on and on and on and on.
Yeah, and they've got. I got a copy of what they call the New States Constitution. They fully intend to gut the one we have and bring in what they call the New States Constitution. It was written a long time ago, sitting on a shelf, kind of like Department of Homeland Security. All that was pre-planned years before it happened. And this New States Constitution is very, very interesting. In fact, it grants all kinds of rights, but then it says, in case of emergency, all these rights can be suspended. So we're kind of at that point now with all these executive orders. In case of emergency, all of our constitutional Bill of Rights are gone. And, of course, the American people sit around twiddling their thumbs, and I don't see any real activity to stop it other than the possibility of a Donald Trump. What's the situation with Trump now? I hear he kind of flip-flopped on immigration.
I tell you what, that Trump card is really a wild card. I'm trying to remember. It's almost easier to say who's for him than actually who's against him, because so many is against him, including his own party, that actually the entire establishment of this nation is against him.
Well, once you have power entrenched, they're not going to give it up. That, I think, history teaches us, that even the most vile of dictators, even if they probably must within their own heart and mind know that what they've done is totally wrong, will not quit and will not give up the power that they have acquired. And I got a feeling that Obama, Hillary, and et cetera do not want to give up power, and if the rich men of the earth are behind them, which it's obvious they are, George Soros particularly, how is Trump going to overdo that? I don't see how he can win. He might win the election, but go ahead.
Number one, he's got to stay alive, if you understand what I'm saying there.
Yes.
And but because he's got so much against him, and number two, I cannot really see how he will be voted in without an intervention from heaven, if I could say that very politically incorrect terminology.
Mhm. Well, there has been that those prophecies which say the hand of the Lord is upon Trump. And no matter what they throw at him, he's kind of like the most maximum Teflon man we've ever seen. That no matter what they throw, it just bounces off him. And that the Lord is really just throwing it back at the people that are throwing it. So if that remains, yes, we could see him get elected and actually take office. But if that does occur, that has to be the hand of the Lord doing it, like your Cyrus.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, too, is Augusto got his hands on a prophetic utterance from somewhere. I don't remember where he got it, but someone had this very extreme experience and said this was what they were shown. Now, this sounds bizarre, okay? I'm not telling anybody to believe any of this. I'm saying this sounds bizarre, but Augusto read it on his show the other day, on the Mailbag Show. He was really intrigued because in this experience this guy had, he was shown that Trump was the man, God's man for the hour, because Trump was going to literally turn this nation's establishment on its head and really judge it. He would that in this experience, if it's true that God was going to use Trump like a Cyrus to like Cyrus overturned the Babylonian system, Trump was going to overturn the Babylonian system we're in now today here in America. And what's interesting, now this is a weird scenario. Hadn't thought about this, but this is what the experience showed. The guy said he saw. He saw something occur that Hillary Clinton, her whole campaign collapsed. Something happened, and he wasn't sure what happened. But then immediately Obama was running against Trump. In other words, Obama stepped into the scene, and even though I know we say, well, he can't run for a third term, well, I guess he could write himself an executive order to run if he declared it a democratic emergency. But anyway, in this experience, they were shown that Obama ran against Trump literally at the last hour, and shockingly, they thought, Obama and his people thought they had it in the bag because of, number one, Obama was the movement against Trump, and number two, the voting machines had all been tampered with. They'd been tampered with for the outcome. Surprise. But something surprise happened right at the end, and Obama and his people were shocked. They lost. And so, now that, I guess people could say, well, that's a dream, that's a fairy tale, that's the strangest vision I heard about. But, that's a scenario we haven't thought about. But I'll tell you what, I was watching earlier tonight this Julian Assange with WikiLeaks, and a lot of those WikiLeaks people are being killed, by the way. They're being killed. But he said, we have got some stuff we haven't released yet that is priority, and it's on a dead man switch. And we're going to release it. We were going to release it in October, and probably it's going to come out in September now. And he said this stuff will bring Hillary and the Clinton Foundation and Bill Clinton down. And now, whether that's true, I can't tell you. But that kind of interesting timing here, how this is all fitting together.
Well, the Clinton murder machine, didn't they try an attempt on Assange over there at the embassy?
Yeah.
Where he's at?
Yeah, there was someone went over the wall in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and tried to get in. And they said it was an assassination attempt, And, of course, we could, maybe they're going both ways with these assassination attempts. You remember, wasn't it the Botch or somewhere said there was going to be some of that?
Yeah, that was, I believe that's Hopi. That what would happen, and I think it was, if I'm just doing this from memory now, the government starts assassinating the oppositions. They just send out their hit squads.
Yeah.
And the people take a look at that and they say, well, okay, I guess if they can kill us, we can kill them. And so the general masses of the people begin to strike back. And the indication is it gets out of control, totally out of control. And it's kind of a war, but yet it's not a war. It's they just keep assassinating each other. But the number of people that have kind of died, shall we say, under questionable circumstances, seems to be increasing, and it seems to be directly tied to anything that might reveal who Hillary and Bill Clinton have done, who they really are behind the scenes. Wow.
Hey, let me run something new by you.
Yeah.
I guess get your opinion here. you know, we've had Barry Rothman, you know, on your show talking, and everybody I think that's listening, or most of them, know Barry Rothman, artcode.com. But anyway, he just did a brand new Torah code on the Zika virus. And his basic question was that he ran the Torah code on was Zika virus, an accident of nature or deliberate, ? Now, he came back. He got an incredible array of words here. You know, when he runs those, and he actually had a map, too, on his website, all the countries and territories with active Zika virus transmissions. But anyway, basically out of the, he did one small matrix, and it came back with the wording. And, of course, people do realize Torah codes are done in Hebrew, and you translate the Hebrew into English. So there was two things came back. Number one, Zika is created. And number two, B. Obama. The initial B and then Obama. And so that was one small code he ran. Then he ran a bigger code. And let me list these. There's actually 10. And it's some really interesting wording, and I get your opinion on here. Number one, Zika virus. Number two, the alien. Number three, the war. Number four, in blood. Number five, UFO descended. Number six, generation to generation. Number seven, embryo. Number eight, poison. Number nine, brain. Number 10, mosquito, and Stewart, all of those terms was in a large, closely knit matrix. So that's interesting with the Zika virus.
Well, that would tend to indicate somebody sent me something that they had a patent on the Zika virus. It's already been patented. Now I can't remember who patented it. Soros or whoever, but they had a patent on it. What's interesting, though, now we're getting off in Bizarro Land, which is great. I love Bizarro Land. It's a lot of fun. Okay, we know from insider reports that alien technology has been granted to the human race in exchange that they can grab people that they want and do ugly things to them if they want. And then they have to release them. It's kind of a catch and release deal. So if alien is there and UFO is there, would that not indicate that maybe the Zika virus is a manufactured, created virus, patented virus, and spread by mosquito like Lyme disease is a created entity? And Lyme disease is a hideous disease. I've had it for years. They say there is no such thing as chronic Lymes, but I have had chronic Lymes for years and years. I keep it back with colloidal silver, basically. It's the only way I can keep it under control. But that would kind of answer some of those questions. It's created. It was probably created with the aid of aliens and UFO technology, and they've decided to release it through mosquitoes. Who knows where this one ends? And it does affect the mind, does it not?
Yeah, that's what it says, the brain, eventually the brain, and it's generation to generation. And what I found interesting when I looked at his Torah code matrix, a lot of the wording came out of Deuteronomy and Exodus and some of those areas of the Torah code, of the Torah. And so to me, it reminded me of generational curses, you know, that are passed down.
Yes. Yeah, the deeds of the father go down for, 4 generations, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that's right.
I'm not sure.
Or could go longer in certain cases, I suppose.
Well, it probably would, because each generation would pass it on and on and on and on which is probably why, like, alcoholism is passed down through family lines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It obviously does things to the DNA and the genetics that are passed down through future generations. So, do you suppose this Zika virus, now talking about the brain, does it say anything about zombie?
Well, no, it doesn't at this time, but you're looking, and I know you've seen some of the children. Barry has a really good image of one of the children that's got that, and how their head is so misshapen, like cone head almost, really strange. And, he was wondering, even as he ran this, core code matrix, he wondered if possibly this was the changing of the DNA somehow, that this was actually changing DNA in individuals, and there would be almost like a new race of people come out of the Zika before it was all said and done.
Well, yeah, I would think it probably absolutely would change the DNA. Remember, is it in Esdras? It talks about women will give birth to monsters. That's
right.
Maybe it's
that's what they. Yeah, that's exactly what they're saying occurs with women that are infected by this Zika. Is the birth, the children that are born are, really, really, in appearance,
deformed.
They're different. They're really deformed and different. Absolutely.
Wow. Huh. Well, when you put all of that together, yeah, that sounds very much like an alien-human combination, scientific deal. Here, let's put this out to the American public and the world, for that matter, because maybe they're just experimenting. I don't know. I mean, these people have no conscience whatsoever. They don't care how many people suffer. They only have an agenda. It's like, I liken them to the rich men, basically, to people that have no conscience whatever. The only thing they have is an agenda, and the agenda has to be fulfilled at all cost. No matter who suffers, no matter how much they suffer, it doesn't matter. And they are really walking biological computers with no compassion at all. And it sort of goes along with what the Bible says, that, at the end, the love of the multitudes grows cold. In other words, the compassion, the mercy that's normal in a person vanishes. It's not there anymore. Which would not be a good thing, I guess, to see. To understate it. What about earth changes? I was looking at some charts that a guy put on YouTube of the rapid increase in earthquakes, volcanoes, sinkholes, rifts. The magnetic poles are rapidly now changing and accelerating, I guess, and nobody's saying anything about it on any of the news. Have you heard any really good news coming out of any of this? It seems like even that volcano down there by Mexico City, what do they call it, Popo, has begun again to shed out some magma. What else is going on? I know you follow a lot of that.
Oh, well, we've had incredible amount of earthquakes recently, and this one is really bad in Italy. It really wasn't it was in the strong range, not major, but strong range of 6.2 or 1, I believe, was the latest report on it. But they're still having aftershocks of about 4 that are literally devastating buildings. I mean, some of these areas look like they have been literally destroyed. I don't know if you've seen some of the pictures coming out of there, but the buildings are just wiped out.
So are we in preparation with all these reports coming out? New Madrid, or New Madrid, however you want to say it, California, the new rifts that, they talked about the mid-continent rift and how that ties actually right into the New Madrid area. All these reports coming out from the government, obviously they must think that something major in Earth changes is coming our way. Have you heard any more on the destroyer? Anything from Marshall Masters at all? I didn't have time to look him up, see what he's doing.
No, it's totally quiet. All of this seems to be right now falling under, it's a secondary to the election. That seems to be captivating all the news almost. Matter of fact, you're not even seeing much news out of the Middle East right now. But all of this other seems to be falling under their classification as climate change. And, Obama's got his move of taking care of the climate ongoing right now. And, if we can just stop fueling a lot of this stuff with coal, we'll probably settle, the whole universe will settle down. But somehow I don't believe that.
Well, you got all those SUVs on Mars, and that's why its climate is changing up there. And, you've got them on Jupiter, you've got them everywhere, and that's why we got to ban all that stuff. The United Nations has made it very, very clear what they intend to do, and they intend to totally take over the United States and the world, for that matter, under Agenda 21/30/50. As far as I can see, it appears as though they're actually going to get away with it. Do you think?
Well,
maybe? Or do you?
Yeah.
Well,
you've got to remember that for some odd reason, a few months ago, the data came out that Obama had his eye on that position as head of the UN, and that they have to have a new head appointed by December. So to me, it's kind of strategic to see which way Obama's going to go. I know he was looking at leaving all of this to Hillary, but if something happens and her campaign either implodes or because of so much incredible corruption and baggage, it just collapses in on itself. It's going to be interesting, the choices he may have to make, but he does have his eyes, we have learned, on running the world from the UN, and so we're having to watch that. But, he's running out of time. The whole system's running out of time.
Well, we know that Netanyahu came out against him getting on to the UN, and of course Netanyahu is not necessarily having a love affair with Obama. It seems like they really hate each other with a passion. And, I think Netanyahu is going to come out on top ultimately if he remains in office and is not assassinated, because it seems like a lot of these leaders are going to be taken out. And but it seems like people like George Soros. Did you see that article, U.S. News? George Soros, I am a god. I created everything.
I saw that.
I control America.
It blew me away.
Yeah, I control America and Hillary Clinton. Now,
wow.
The Book of Enoch says that that's essentially true. That through money, they control the world. The Bible talks about the rich men of the earth. If people don't believe it, your troubles are the rich men of the earth. You'll find them listed in Psalm 2, Deuteronomy chapter 28, Revelation chapter 18. Fingers these rich people, and they run the world. And evidently, George Soros is at the top of the heap. Is there anybody who has more money than he does?
Well, I'm not sure, but what's interesting is David Bunn really explained to us that it's a world economy, that no longer really do we have national economies. It's basically an entire global economy going on right now, right in our face. And I know a lot of people don't believe that. They still believe in the bank systems. But in all reality, David Bunn just explained to us that it's global.
Yes. Well, the IMF is the big center for all of it now. I have been told, I haven't looked at a what do you call them, a treasury check, but I was told that is IMF. It's not the United States of America, it's IMF. And, when you start talking about, what did he call it, $128 trillion in derivatives daily?
Yeah. It just
we can't even wrap our mind around that.
No.
So if the derivatives fail, the whole thing goes poof. Could happen overnight. It makes you wonder. They're obviously preparing for something, whether it's a destroyer, the super galactic wave, or they're going to start World War III. Who knows? But it seems like we are. Do you have the feeling that we're right on the edge of something, or do you think it's? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Stewart, when you asked me that, I'm getting emails and some letters too from people that they're all feeling that. There's a feeling. We go back to David Bunn, what he was saying, like voices in our head. There's feelings that people all over the world are having that something is very close, it's imminent, and nobody seems to know exactly what it is, but everybody, I have tons of emails that people are feeling this, just what you just said.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I suppose, how do you know? Is this a sudden destruction of Thessalonians? When they say peace and security, then sudden destruction cometh upon them. They will not escape, but ye brethren, ye are children of the day, of the light, and that will not hurt you. So here we are. We're sitting on the edge of darkness, kind of like that movie with Mel Gibson, The Edge of Darkness. It's just weird. And you're right. People are just feeling something is right around the corner, but they can't put their finger on it.
And what's so interesting, too, Stewart, to back up what you just said, is the fact that a lot of the Torah codes that they have ran looking into, they seem to really build into 2016, but they're, the 2017 Torah codes almost act like the Mayan 2012 date. It's almost like it's hard to see beyond that.
Yeah. And when I did the Omega code, you have to question, where is that in relation to what most people would consider Daniel's 70th week? We should probably talk about that on another show, but are we looking at after 2017, September 23rd, and the star alignment we find in Revelation? Are we looking at the beginning of the tribulation? Are we looking at the midpoint? Are we looking at sudden destruction and everything changes? There are those who have said, well, if a rapture took place and the whole church was removed, that would certainly be a sudden destruction to the world, kind of like the Left Behind movies. But it could be a world war. It could be the destroyer coming or the Galactic Super Wave. That would bring sudden destruction. I know Paul LaViolette says there is no warning. You see it. It's there. Anyway, how do people get a hold of you, Larry?
Oh, the easiest way is just to go to my blog, LarryWTaylor.org. That's LarryWTaylor.org, and just follow the blog, and you can email me or whatever from there.
Well, good. I really appreciate you coming on tonight. That was quite an interview with Davis. That's fascinating. How somebody like that can produce so much and valuable information undoubtedly buried within the pages that he writes. So anyway, thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. And I guess we're about ready to have to sign off. So appreciate everybody listening, and we'll be with you again next week. So take care, Larry. Don't take any
Thanks
wooden
a lot,
nickels.
Stuart. Okay, bye.
Yep, night.